Okay. Um, it's a little bit hard for me to check for understanding. So what I'm going to ask you to do tonight is to actively engage with me and with each other in the chat box. I might ask like some yes or no questions, like I say like ready to start, yes or no. Just type in like a Y for yes, and of course the answer is yes. But it gives me a good, guide to pace myself and to see if we're ready to move on. I might ask you to type some short responses in the chat box. So by all means, use the chat box freely to back channel as I'm talking, but also to, engage with me when I ask you some questions. Okay. My hope tonight is to review coding with you. You coded data a while back. To go over a little bit of data analysis and drawing conclusions. I'm going to model for you in vivo, but the context in which I'm going to do this is really to get you ready to do that signature assignment in 755. Okay? So let me start there. You should be well on your way to complete your 755 assignment, the signature assignment. And I believe you should be getting data collection, and doing interviews and observations, collecting artifacts this week. I'll talk a little bit about that, but what happens after you get the data then is you're going to need to code the data. And last term, you coded the data with a partner, and you did it likely face-to-face, and you went a couple of rounds with it. We had a webinar where you shared your themes with your instructor. They gave you some feedback. You went back and refined it. This term, you're coding your own data that you collected by yourself. And so we're kind of taking off the training wheels and setting you guys free to do it on your own, but still in a guided practice kind of a setting where you get some feedback from your instructor. The hope is that, through this like evolution of interactions where progressively it gets more and more, I guess, individualized. The hope is that when you get to dissertation, you've got the skills to do it yourself. Okay, you've got the skills to do it yourself. That said, let's go to a quick review of coding. Okay, so coding is the process of assigning a word or a phrase that accurately describes the meaning of text segments. So what type of things can you code? You can code interview transcripts. You can code field notes from observations. So if you've been in the field doing observations, you're going to, take what you hand wrote, probably on a line paper, notepad or something. You're going to type that up, and the words that you type up, the text, is what you can code. And then artifacts could be like a Word doc or PDF, and information on that in terms of words can also be coded. Okay, but for your mini studies, you are required to do interviews, and then you can pick from observations and artifacts. But in some cases, and I'm teaching 2 sections of this class right now, several students have already approached me and said, Dr. Lee, I'm not finding many artifacts, and I'm afraid if I do observations, I'll sit there for an hour and not get a lot of field notes that directly answer my research question. What do I do? So in those situations, you are likely going to double up on the interviews because you have very limited opportunities to observe and probably have very few artifacts that you can get. So if you're in one of those situations, then you need to reach out to your instructor and have a communication with your instructor on this idea that for your mini study, it's likely you'll do double the amount of interviews with no observations and artifacts. Get that cleared with your instructor first. Now, that said, you could do all of the interviews and observations and artifacts. You collect all your data, but if you're at a point where you're not getting very rich data, it's actually going to make your signature assignment pretty difficult to write, because your signature assignment, you're going to summarize the themes and you're going to report out on the story of those themes. And so if you don't have a lot of frequency counts for those themes, the data is not very rich, then you're likely going to need to do more interviews anyway, so that you have some substance to use when it comes to your signature assignment. Okay. How many interviews? You're required to do 2 interviews minimally, and then observations and artifacts. And again, if it's the case where you're not getting a lot of data or rich data, if you wanted to do more, you could do more. Okay, but minimally 2 to fulfill the assignment. But for every study, it's going to be slightly different, and you'll have to gauge that somewhere along the way. And if you're coding, you realize, wow, I'm going to need some more data to code so I have more frequencies. You may need to go out and do just 1 or 2 more interviews. I've had some students do like 6 or 7 interviews. That's certainly great. I've had students do 2 interviews, and they're really rich interviews with lots and lots of like juicy data that can be coded. And so, I've had students do the minimum amount of data collection for interviews, and that worked out okay too. You'll have to gauge that as you go. Okay. Fast forwarding to your dissertation, if you're doing qualitative research, you will likely get most of your data from interviews, and that's just the way it works for EDD type dissertations. You get people to tell their stories, and they kind of just liven up in the room and share with you fantastic stories about their experience, and you sometimes can't get them to stop talking. Right? And so the interviews are where the good stories are. Sometimes there are opportunities to observe, but observations, again, have to be direct evidence that answers your research question. And so as such, sometimes you can do like an hour or 2 of observations and find very little evidence of, say, a leader using emotional intelligence or something, when the leader, speaks for 5 minutes and then sits in the back of the room along with the other participants. So you can sit there for an hour and not see much. So you got to be really careful about observations. And I would say the same with artifacts. So they're kind of difficult to get unless you know exactly what you're looking for. So really take the time to practice interviews, because likely you'll be using lots and lots of interviews for your dissertation. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about terminology. Coding and code, okay, that's a qualitative research term. So you code data. Coding is the process of coding the data, but the data itself can be called a code. Sometimes codes are referred to as themes. Those 2 words are used synonymously. And then the new term I want to introduce tonight is the word node. And node is an in vivo term for code and theme. And so here's a common mistake, okay? I've seen students use the term node in their dissertation, but your audience may not know what that is because they've never used in vivo. So you only use the term node when you're working within in vivo. That's the terminology they use. But then outside of in vivo, you want to switch to calling them codes or themes, okay? So just a quick check for calibrating our terminology here is that's how they're used. All right, your data needs to be triangulated as much as possible. So this is why we teach you to do observations and artifact collection. But again, how much of each? I don't like this picture so much in a sense that it's not always proportional like that. But I love the visual effect of like there's 3 types of data. So in other words, you could have like 75% of your data comes from interviews, 15% from observations, and 10% from artifacts. Or it could be, 50% observations and 25 for interviews and artifacts. So it's all uniquely different for every study. But the more touch points you have with the different types of data, the more you can triangulate your data. Okay. Another tip as you work with the signature assignment is alignment. And you probably saw this in the last webinar, is that you need to, whoop, a little too far. You need to align your conclusions and themes in your interview questions all the way back to your research question. And I've been on the phone a lot with some students, many students in the last couple of weeks, and we've been looking at interview questions, and inevitably your first try at this, I've seen a lot of students have like one, if not two interview questions that don't answer the research question. So it's misaligned. So if you ask those two questions, you can get responses, but those responses are not going to answer your research question, so they're not essentially not usable. So you want to just make sure there's alignment. I would say the same thing with coding. You can have themes emerge, but if those themes don't answer the research question, they're not part of your study. So alignment is extremely important, okay? So one thing we can do is to come up with the process to make sure there's proper alignment with coding, okay? So last term, I taught you guys how to have a sentence frame and essentially turn the question into a prompt with a fill in the blank, okay? And if your theme fits in that blank, then there's alignment to answering that research question. If it doesn't complete the sentence, if it goes in that blank, it doesn't complete the sentence, then you've got misalignment between the theme, the way you're naming your theme, and the research question. This is extremely important because as you do the coding assignment that's up and coming, you want to make sure that you're naming your themes appropriately. And remember, a good theme name is descriptive, and it's got some kind of like deep meaning to it. So in other words, it's not just, they experience greatness, right? Well, what about that? And so if you look at this prompt, what are students' experiences learning new technologies at the EDD bootcamp? So when learning new technologies at the EDD bootcamp, students experience blank, right? So I'm just going to make some stuff up, and maybe it's, I don't know, let me see. So something like that, intuitive instruction on the specific technology. So the presenter has good instinct on what is easy for the audience or what is not. But notice what's happening here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's about 6 words there that describe a theme that potentially can emerge from the data, right? So you want about 4 to 6 words. 3 is okay, 7's probably okay. You want some kind of descriptive theme name so that you can have a good title for that summary you're going to write. I think that the theme names are too long, then they become restrictive, right? So every like prepositional clause you throw at this theme name starts limiting the data that can be coded into that theme. So you don't want it to be too long, in other words, but you do want it to be descriptive. And so I'm going to ask you to just practice for a minute, type in the chat box, think back at your bootcamp experience, learning like the Leatherby library and stuff like that. Can you come up with 4 to 6 words that describe your experience at bootcamp learning new technologies? Go ahead and type that in the chat box. We'll do that for just a minute here. Okay, you guys are getting the hang of it. I'm going to address some of the one-word theme names to say that those are just too short. You're going to have to add some more descriptors to it. So let me kind of play with some of them. So, and I saw a lot of folks write overwhelming. Think about like who, what, when, where, why. So what was overwhelming? So you can turn overwhelming into something like the directions for I don't know, Blackboard are overwhelming, right? So that gives it a little bit more description. Challenging, what was challenging? Challenging to complete the tasks on time. So the time factor is challenging, okay? So again, give your theme names a little bit more description, but keep it to about 4 to 6 words. And it definitely was challenging. All right, any questions on this? Okay. Again, this is a refresher, but since it's been a while since you've coded, I wanted to spend a little bit extra time so that we're all on the same page when it comes to giving your data, the theme names that are appearing in the data, okay? All right, so once the data has been coded, then you can begin to analyze the themes. You want to analyze them for trends. You want to analyze them for frequencies. Sometimes the theme names will have like 70 frequency counts. Another theme will have like 8 counts. So is a 71, is a theme with 70 frequency counts more significant, or is it the theme name with 7? So that can be a little bit debatable, but you want to kind of look at them and look at the preponderance of the evidence. What is it saying to you? Okay, and when you're writing the qualitative analysis or report, the summary, if you will, you want to give detailed information about a few of the themes as opposed to generalizing about so many themes. So be as specific as you can when you're talking about these themes. And then I love using tables. I think tables convey a whole lot of meaning. So try to use some tables in your narrative. We'll look at some examples here in a minute back in 754. But let's see here. Overview of NVivo. Okay, so NVivo is a software. I'm sure you've heard of it by now. And it's a software that helps you organize your codes. And I want to underscore the word organize. The misconception is that you put all your data in there and it codes it for you, right? NVivo does not code for you. You are still the coder because I saw this Microsoft commercial on TV the other day about how Microsoft computer chips are so smart they can actually, figure out, like, I don't know what the flavor of a certain drink is by calculating the chemicals and predicting stuff. Well, computers are not smart enough, at least today, to know what makes a good theme name and what evidence goes into that theme. So this is a software that's going to save you a whole lot of time, and it's going to help you organize the codes, but just the misconception is it doesn't code for you, okay? It doesn't code for you. It doesn't transcribe for you. But I just saw the new version of NVivo, and there is a transcription feature to it. So it's not covered in this course. If you want to try it, let me know how it goes. But I think there's a built-in transcription tool. I think there's outside of NVivo transcription services, and then you can always just transcribe it yourself. Okay, but again, it does not code the data for you. You are still the coder. The software helps you organize your codes. Okay, so I'm going to do a demonstration in a minute using NVivo. And I want to say just that there's a whole lot of features in NVivo that I would consider like bells and whistles. What I'm going to teach you are the basic steps of NVivo. And that's all you need to know to do this assignment. The basic steps are all you need to know to do your dissertation. Everything else in there, I'd say probably about 75% of the features in there you'll never use because it's used for some very high-level analytic tools, but I'm going to teach you just the basic skills on how to use NVivo. So the basic steps are importing the data, for creating a node, which is a theme, and then to code your data into those themes. And then the last step is to export the themes. Okay, so those are the basic steps that I am going to cover. So I'm going to use the data from 754 for this demonstration. Why did consumers like iPads? And oh, this is important. And the assignment, the NVivo assignment, is very intentionally designed to start at a certain time. And the reason that it's not until this module is because I wanted you to use the free 14-day trial, so you didn't have to purchase the software. The software is very expensive if you buy the full version. It's, I forget, it's like several $100s. And then I think for most students that are in dissertation, they buy the semester fee, which I think is, if I remember correctly, it's like $100, as opposed to like $700, I think is what it used to run. But in all reality, you may not do qualitative research for your dissertation, so it's very intentionally designed for you to use the 14-day free trial. Okay. When you get to dissertation, by the way, every regional center at Brandman, EDD, we've leveraged some site license funding so that there's one computer at every regional center that has NVivo installed. So you could actually go on campus and locate that one computer in the lab and use NVivo for free. Essentially, Brandman paid for it. So that's the other option. Okay. I'm going to be using a Mac for my demonstration, but the thought is on the PC, the interface looks a little bit different, but the steps are the same and the buttons are named essentially the same. Okay, so what do I do? Let me get set up here. You guys doing okay? I'm gonna share. All right. Almost done, bear with me. Zoom is a little clunky on how to set up the interface to share, and so give me just one more second here. Almost done. Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay. All right. So this is the interface for NVivo. There's actually a menu bar above that you can't see, but essentially this is the interface. It's a Zoom, I think, issue, not being able to see the full screen. But anyway, so when you create a new document in NVivo, the first thing, you open it up, it says create a new document, you say yes. So I just called it demo, okay? On the left-hand side, you've got some buttons you can click. There's some drop-down menu buttons up here. And then at the very top, you can't see it, unfortunately, because it's like outside of my Zoom actual window, but there's some other buttons. Okay, so I can tell you what the buttons are. But anyhow, so the first thing we're gonna do is import some data. So I'm gonna click on data. And on my desktop, I have a folder with some data in it. So I'm gonna actually click on documents. Okay, and it's gonna say, you know, where do you wanna look for your documents? So I've got a NVivo demo folder, and I've got some data. And this is the data you used last term. So there's respondent 1, and it's importing the data. And it will take a second. Okay, and I'm gonna click, it's gonna say, what do you wanna name it? I'll just name it respondent 1, I'll click done. So here's respondent 1, and here's the text from the Word doc where that came from, okay? And you're gonna do this for the rest of them. So I'm going to import like all 10 of them. You can actually multiple select and import, which really helps. But notice I had every respondent as a new file. In other words, you don't want the whole thing to be one file. You want each respondent to have their own file for the transcript. And the reason for that is NVivo will track the sources, number of sources. So each document is a source. So if 5 people talked about a particular theme, it should technically have a frequency count of 5 for the sources. And if you have everything in one document, you'll only have one source for everything. That's why it's important to have each respondent as a separate source. Okay, probably should not have imported all 10, so bear with me on that. My computer is extremely slow. This is, you know, before NVivo came along, we used to code using like construction paper color. We cut and paste using glue stick and scissors, and that was fine. But I got to tell you, I wish I had NVivo when I was doing my doctorate degree, because it would have saved me so much agony in terms of like organizing stuff. But here's what really becomes helpful. If you have one response that can be coded into multiple themes, if you're cutting paper and gluing using glue sticks on like, you know, construction paper that have themes, you would have to print out that transcript 5 different times to cut out that same paragraph. And boy, does that get really messy really quick, because you got a huge table with like 5 different transcripts. Each transcript could be like 3 or 4, you know, pages, and your table begins to have like papers everywhere. And so you know, this software helps you organize it so much better. Okay. Do the response documents have to be formatted in a particular way? Word docs work the best. It will take PDF, but I found that Word docs are the best. So, you know, putting them in Word docs, folders and files, naming structure is important. Respondent 1, respondent 2, stuff like that. It all comes into play when you're organizing stuff. Okay. Would we do the same process for extracting documents for observation? Yep, exactly. So Toulouse asked a great question. So what about observations and artifacts? So I would call like observation 1, that would be my field notes for observation 1. And then another one might be observation 2, and then something like that. You can have artifact 1, artifact 2, artifact 3, but you probably need some kind of like way to decipher it, to say like artifact 1 is is, you know, like the directions for the iPad, or artifact 2 is the meeting minutes from, you know, May or something like that. Okay. If a person repeats himself, does each time he says the idea count towards the frequency, or is that just counted as once? Your call on that. I mean, just be consistent. If you're you know, repeating a certain thing a couple times, you could code it like at, you know, 3 times in one interview, but as long as you're consistently doing it in all, that's fine. If you code the entire paragraph and count it as one frequency, then just be consistent when you do it in other interviews. Okay, Emily, good question. So for our transcripts, we do or do not want to name each response as we interview. No, just the way like this, Aaron, you know, respondent 1, and here's the entire transcript from that interview. Okay, that's how you should do it. Okay, so I have imported 10 interviews. So like here's interview 2, here's interview 3, and this is again the data you used last term. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is go to nodes. Okay, and I'm going to create a new node. So as I look at this, should we take out the interview question? No, leave it in there. I would leave it in there, Wendy. No one will ever read your transcript, so you can leave, you know, a lot of information there. No one would ever know, so I would leave it in there. Okay, so I'm going to say maybe a theme is I just named a theme. The technology is adaptable to technological changes. In other words, iPads, you can write apps and it can adapt to whatever the app wants it to do. So again, look at the number of words. Technology is adaptable to technical changes. That's 6 words, right? That's a very specific theme that's very descriptive, okay? And so I'm going to create another code, or in this case, node, and there's a circle button up here. Click on that, and we'll just name another theme. iPads are intuitive and easy to use. Okay, and just for kicks, I'll do another one. Pricey but worth it or something. Okay, that's 4 words. So then what you want to do is you want to go back to your transcript, and maybe it's like respondent 1, and you say, okay, here's some discussion about the price. So maybe, and I'm not gonna, don't fact check me, but let's just say that one has to do with the pricey one. So you highlight it, and you drag, and you drop, and it goes into that theme, okay? And you can see that for pricey but worth it, now I have 1 file and 1 reference, okay? And here's another discussion about the price. So maybe this whole paragraph, I'm going to drag and drop. So now you can see it's still 1 file because it's still respondent 1, but the frequency went up to 2. So because I dragged this evidence into that theme. I love it because it's so intuitive. It's highlighting, dragging, and dropping. And literally, you can go through an entire transcript and just have a lot of fun dragging and dropping. It's so cool, okay? And let's say this response is something that can be coded into multiple themes. So you can drag it, and you can drag it, okay? So now 1 paragraph is now coded into 3 themes, okay? Again, don't fact check me, but I'm just doing that as an example, okay? How about the color? Don't worry about the color. I mean, that's just the highlighting, okay? Will you please do another respondent? Yes, of course. So here's respondent 1. Here's respondent 2. And let's see here. Okay, great value, definitely by budget. Okay, so that's about the price. So watch what happens. The second one, it bumped it up to 2 sources with 3 references. Okay, and this is about the technology piece. Maybe it's adaptable to change and intuitive and easy to use. Maybe like it's like the first part of it. Maybe it's like those sentences, drag and drop. Whoop. Okay, literally drag and drop, okay? All right, and if you, it's down here, these are shortcuts, but if you wanted to open more, you can go to files, and there's your other responses. Maybe you want to go to respondent 10, right? And then you can go back to the nodes, and you can say, okay, well, older people use, okay, so that's like the intuitive one, so that's that, okay? So let me go back to this one. It's got a lot of data, so I'm just gonna load up one of these, and actually, let me go a couple more interviews for, okay. So, by the way, when you get to chapter 4 of your dissertation, or when you do your signature assignment for this class, here is a wonderful table right here. You've got your theme name, sources, and frequency. So that information right there, if you were to take a screenshot of that and just put it in a table, that's a fantastic table to have in your summary of themes. But remember, you always go with the highest frequency count first, so 5, 3, and 2. That's how the table should be sorted when you make a table with qualitative data. But the last step, which I actually think is my favorite, I mean, you think dragging and dropping is cool. This is my favorite part of NVivo, okay? And so if I double click on that theme, you can see all of the evidence for that theme right here in one place, okay? And so doesn't this make the summary so easy to write? Literally, here are the stories, the narrative that backs up the theme name, intuitive and easy to use. So you can literally say, iPads are intuitive and easy to use. The data from this study, comprised of 10 interviews, of which 4 respondents reflected on this idea that iPads are intuitive and easy to use. In fact, this theme appeared 5 times in the data. Here's what the respondents said. You can just kind of walk through these stories. It's all in one place. And in fact, you can go to data, and here you see export. If you click export this item, okay, intuitive and easy to use, it puts that in the save as name. Down here, it's a Microsoft Word document. And when you click OK, you've just pulled the collated evidence of that theme, and you've exported it into a Word doc, okay? This is my all-time favorite feature of NVivo, the ability to export a theme into a Word doc, because once it's in this Word doc, it's like copying and pasting quotes as you tell the story. It's that easy to use at that point. So it's exporting, and let me actually stop sharing, and let's see here. Do this, and I'm going to share this one. Okay, so I just exported this document. Okay, and here's all the evidence. So literally, I can come in here and insert a table. Bear with me. So you can say the theme is intuitive and easy to use. The frequency and the source count is here. Whoop. I'm totally screwing up Microsoft Word. What's going on? Okay, something like that. And you've got frequency counts down here. So that's a nice table you can just whip out with that table that was in NVivo. And then you can just start writing the narrative. You can say this study focused on, and then your research question, right? There were 10 interviews, and the highest frequency for themes is intuitive and easy to use, right? This theme appeared 4 times in the data. This theme came from 4 respondents, and it appeared 5 times in the data. Here is what the respondents said. and then you can start to tell the story, right? And by the way, when you're writing these narratives, it's not quote after quote after quote. You've got to synthesize the story. You want to say, you know, many people have upgraded their iPads over time. And you want to tell that story and then use the quote as a way to highlight the point that you're trying to make. A lot of people don't frame the quotes very well, and the quote becomes overbearing. The quote should only be a small fraction of what the summary is. You've got to tell the story of the summary and just pick out a few quotes to highlight it, okay? So again, this Word document that you exported literally then becomes almost like a usable document as you're writing the summary for that theme, okay? So any questions on what I just did? I'm going to walk through it one more time from beginning to end, but any questions on what NVivo does or, yeah, anything like that, okay? Percentage covered. I don't really pay attention to that. I think what that means is, you know, 10% of the overall data came from this response, so it's probably like number of words divided by the total number of words for the whole document, but I never use that response because it's not very usable for writing a summary. Okay, I would suggest, that's a good question, Max, I would suggest a mini table for each theme, but I would expand this table to include all the themes at the top of the paper. So if you had 6 themes, put all 6 themes and their sources and frequency counts into one big table. And then when you go to write the story of this one theme, and this is where leveled headings come into play. So data, right? So data might be like a level 1 theme. I'm incorporating a lot of like writing conventions. I hope that's okay. But then you want to write theme 1. So that would be a level 2 heading. So I would put a big table here with all themes, and then like narrative up here, right? And then when you get to a level 2, then you can have another heading and just do one of them to give the reader that visual. Because, you know, honestly, for a dissertation, chapter 4 could be like 30 pages. So I love the one-line table so that you can have a visual to go with that theme, because the last time they saw that table could have been like 30 pages ago with 6 other themes. Okay, so not on NVivo, Vicky. We're going to have a coding exercise at the June immersion that I'm going to lead, but not NVivo. So NVivo, there's tutorials, there's the walkthrough tonight, and then I'll show you guys what to do if your cohort really gets stuck. I'll talk about that in a minute, but let me actually back up and go back to here and share the screen. Oh my goodness. Okay, go back to my NVivo screen, and I'm gonna just do a walkthrough from beginning to end one last time here. So I'm going to actually start all over, and I'm going to just create a new project. I'll call it demonstration. I'll call the second one. Okay. All right, so it's going to make me a new NVivo document. Okay. And it literally has no data and no themes. Okay. So I'm going to go to data. It's a document. And I'm going to just import 3 transcripts. stuck. Seriously, they refresh our laptops like once. It feels like a decade, but it really is like 4 years. And this is a pretty old laptop, so I apologize. It's running a little bit slow. I'm overdue for a new computer, but it's going to do its thing. It's going to import it. And the next thing you do is create the nodes. And once you create the nodes, which are themes, then you can highlight, drag, and drop into those themes. And that's the coding process. And then for each theme, you'll want to export it as a Word doc and start working with it in Microsoft Word. Okay. What other tips can I share with you while we're waiting for the computer? Scanning your data for themes is very important. Okay, let me spend just a minute on that. You want to make sure that you have thoroughly scanned and picked up all the potential themes, because let's say there's 10 interviews. What do you think would have to happen if you're on the 9th interview and you discover, oh, there's one more theme that is in the data that I didn't note before? So what you're going to have to do is then create a new theme, a new node in NVivo, and you're going to have to go back and recode every single transcript, read every single transcript, paragraph by paragraph, and then highlight and drag and drop for that new theme that you discovered on your 9th interview response. So, you know, you need to just do a thorough scan and get as many themes as you can so you don't have to recode data if you're discovering new themes later, okay? All right, so yeah, Cameron, are all the transcripts in Word doc or different transcripts? I would put all of it in Word doc, okay? Katrina, for the mini study, what's a good number of frequencies per theme? Hard to say. I think you should be, you know, hovering around maybe like 8 to 10 or 12 frequencies for each of your themes, considering you only have, you know, maybe 2 interviews, 2 observations, or 4 interviews and no observations or something. But you should be, you know, around maybe 8 to 10 frequency counts per theme so that you have something of substance to write. Notice when I did that Word doc demonstration earlier, I've got a lot of stories underneath that one-line table. And so the more you can code into these themes, the easier your signature assignment's going to be. It would be extremely hard to write a signature assignment for this class if you don't have a lot of data that's coded. So that's why it's really like mini study specific as to how much or how little or how many themes you need to get. And then let's see here. Systematic way to decide how many themes. No, there isn't. It's you know, you could read a large transcript and it can only have 1 frequency count for 1 theme. You can read a transcript that's half that length and have a lot more codable data. So there's no systematic way. It's just really how well did you design your interview questions to help answer your research question is one factor, that alignment thing. And then how rich are the responses? And some people like to go deep into the narrative or 1 response. So a huge paragraph can be coded into 1 frequency count. And other people like to give shorter stories, but many of them. So, you know, stylistically, you know, like people are going to answer how they're going to answer, but a lot of that is controlled by you and how you design your interview question. But also, I think even more importantly, how you intuitively come up with follow-up questions as you're interviewing, okay? Can you change where your data, drag and drop, if you decide to use a different node? Lucinda, tell me a little bit more. I'm not following that question. Change your data. Yeah, to like undo it, I think is what you're asking. There's a way to do that. I haven't had to do that in a while, so I don't, if there is data in node 1, but you want to change it to 3 or add it to 3. You can add it by, let's see here. You can add it to 3, but to change it, I think you have to go in and delete the frequency that you coded. I forget how to do that, but you probably just have to play around with the buttons to do it. There's a way, you just drag and drop into multiple themes if it goes in both. But to delete one and move it to another, you would just add it to the new one, but there's a way to delete it. And I don't recall what that step looks like. Okay. lots of questions, so I'm going to keep going with the questions here. Right now, we're just talking about respondents. After each theme, should that be where we should also include the triangulation data? Should the data also be included in the frequencies or separately? Okay, so triangulation of data, you can explain that in the narrative, Heather. So you can say something like, data for this theme came from, like 8 sources. However, of the 8, it covered interviews, observations, as well as artifacts. And I've even seen it where the table with the sources gets broken down into all 3 of those things. Okay. So stylistically, you can do it in table form. I definitely would include it in the narrative. Like if you find a golden, like nugget of a jewel, in an artifact, then you want to say, interview responses were also triangulated in this particular artifact, and use that term triangulated and talk about how 2 different data points are speaking to the same theme. Okay. And then the second question, should that data also be included in the frequencies or separate? They should be included in the frequency. So the frequency count will include interviews, observations, as well as artifacts. Okay. Yes, that's right. Could you put respondent 1 and artifact 1, etc.? Yep, I'll do that in a sec. Okay. I think I missed a question. The Apple transcript function, final thoughts for our transcript. We have full questions, so do we just summarize a few words where function or final thoughts are in these examples? Aaron, are you referring to the names of the themes? I think you are. So
yes,
sometimes theme names are not literal. You can come up with a higher level, like synthesis of ideas theme named, So I think final thoughts, when I see quotes like that, I'm thinking you're trying to name the theme name something similar to the words that were used, which is fine, but sometimes just note that they're not always literally what it says in the transcript. Okay. All right. So theme 1, we'll just say. Okay. Okay, I'll just do 2 for now. And then you've got your response, highlight, drag, and drop. Highlight, drag, and drop. I'm going to move this over so you can see the numbers. Highlight, drag, and drop. Okay, now the mouse button on the PC is a little bit different than the Mac. On the Mac, you actually have to highlight, click on the button for a prolonged like 2 or 3 seconds, and then you're able to drop. If you don't do that, it just continues to highlight other things. So if it gets a little clunky, all that means, especially on a Mac, is you got to highlight and you got to literally click on it and hold your button there for 2 seconds, and then you're able to drag it. Okay. All right. So. Do you see the other screen? Oh, are you guys seeing the old screen? Like the old demo? I think you are. Ah, okay, hold on a second. No wonder. I'm so sorry about that. Stop share. Share. I think it's this one then. Sorry. Can you see the highlighting now? Oh my gosh. All right. Okay, I feel terrible. You guys are looking at the other screen. Sorry about that, but I basically went through the same steps, imported the data files, created my nodes up here, and then I'm just highlighting and dragging and dropping. Okay, and then the export tool is under data, export items, and you can give it a name, and that's the Word doc that you can use. okay? I want to show you one other thing that you're probably not going to do for your mini study, but this might be a cool thing for your dissertation. So under data, you can import documents, PDFs, but notice there's a function here for pictures. So you can actually import a picture as evidence. Isn't that cool? And so you can give the picture a name, but there's a picture of my kiddos and their cousins. My son's in the green and the red and the black, so you can have picture as evidence. And so then let's say you're going to code the data. You can actually highlight a portion of the picture and you can click it and drag and drop. Okay, so you might say, when would this be handy? So if you had a picture of, if you're a teacher and you're looking for that engaging and sustaining a safe environment for learning, which is, I think, is CSTP1. So if you're coding for the first California standard for the teaching profession, you got a picture of a kid in a classroom and his face lights up and he's engaged. You can actually crop that kid's face. Here's Andrew, his face, and say that's a picture of a kid that's engaged. Okay, so when you go and double click on that that theme name, you've actually got the pictures in addition to the narrative. I show the pictures, I think that'll be handy, but in fact, you can actually do videos and audios. I would not do that, don't go there. Audios and videos, you can actually crop a segment, but you know what? You're writing a dissertation, and your dissertation is not multimedia, so audios and videos are gonna be transcribed into words and coded using words anyways. So I wouldn't touch these two, although know that you can. But the picture one is really cool because you've got picture as evidence. You can crop parts of the pictures and code that. Okay, Robin says, is this where we would use for an artifact? If the artifact is a picture, yes. If the artifact is like meeting minutes in Word doc format, you would just import the words. But yes, absolutely, if it's a picture, you can import it that way. Okay, and then if you were to export this, I'm not going to export it because it took a while last time, but essentially then you've got this part of it exported, and you can just take that picture and put it into your narrative and say, here's Andrew at 3 years old, and he's so engaged at the beginning of lesson, he even threw his hands up in the air with a big smile, right? So that's what you would how you would use a picture. You would use the picture and then write the narrative around it. Okay, yeah, so the narrative. Now, transcripts. Transcripts are long. They do not belong in your dissertation. They do not belong in your signature assignment. You're only pulling out a few quotes from the transcript that are coded that can potentially be written into the narrative. So don't feel like you have 100 pages of transcripts for your dissertation. You stick 100 pages in the appendices. That's not the case. The transcripts never go anywhere. It's part of NVivo. You keep that private, but you use the coding software to pull out the key quotes that you potentially can use in the narrative. Okay? All right, any other questions on NVivo? All right, I'm pretty good with technology, but sometimes I think it's easier to have somebody walk you through and do a live demo, and I think it's even helpful to have it explained in the context that you're used to. So that was what my attempt was tonight, is to show you NVivo in the context that you understand in a talk through that makes sense in 755. There's tutorials built in to the Blackboard shell that will help. This webinar is recorded, so you can always come back and watch this recording. And then let me actually, I'll start to wrap up. I need just a little bit more time. Let me actually go back to the PowerPoint and say that you definitely are going to need some sandbox time and play with it. I think, just like your new smartphones, the best way to learn it is to play with it. And if you play with it. You'll likely learn on your own. The tutorials are going to support you. But your next layer of help is to reach out to your cohort and have some classmates walk you through some hiccups along the way. Okay, so definitely you don't need NVivo for immersion. You only do NVivo for the coding assignment, and then you're done with it. It's just a 2-week experience with the free software. And once you experience it, you can decide if you want to use it for your dissertation, but it's not part of immersion. Okay, good question. You are supposed to turn in transcript for 2.1, Wendy, but for the signature assignment, which is a summary of all the themes, you've already turned in your transcript. The signature assignment, you don't need to have the transcript. Okay? All right, so where was I? Okay, so next steps is for you to try NVivo. Okay, and those basic steps, which are to import the data, create the codes, code it, and then export it. And then if your cohort can't figure something out, and understand it's, you know, Dr. Lee, one person, there's many cohorts, but if your entire cohort can't figure something out, or if your entire cohort needs, you know, a quick dose of like a demo or something, then have one person in the cohort reach out to me and set up a time. I'm happy to work, you know, with entire cohort, but I certainly cannot, I don't have the bandwidth to do one-on-one tutorials, so we're going to triage it a little bit and say, work with your cohort, but if your entire cohort needs some help, then reach out to me. Your instructors also know the software, so you can also reach out to them and schedule some time to demo it. But in the past, we've done this for many years. It's a very intuitive software, and if you invest some time playing with it, you'll be able to figure it out. Okay? And I showed the wrong slideshow. There was one more slide. Oh my goodness. Give me 1 second here. So anticlimactic. I am so sorry. Okay, here we go. 1 second. Let's try this one. All right. So any questions before we wrap up? Yeah, if you just answer the research question, you got to take it out, Antonio, because it's not aligned. Okay. All right. So here's your surprise. You ready? Here's your surprise. Is your signature assignment is scheduled to be due on the Sunday evening of immersion. Please don't do that. Okay. I've gotten special permission to extend the deadline until Wednesday, the week after immersion. Okay. So it's a special, yeah, exactly. It's a special situation because I actually have a hands-on activity designed for immersion that will act as a summative assessment for coding. I really would like you to experience that, that activity before you submit your signature assignment. So even if you get it done before immersion, which I assume many of you will, hold off on turning it in, go through the exercise at immersion, and then take that extra 3 days to do any tweaks or modifications you need to do, and then submit it no later than Wednesday, July 3rd, after immersion. Okay, so that's your surprise for tonight for hanging out with me, is that we push the deadline 3 days out so that you get to have 3 more days after immersion to do it. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I find this to be a very user-friendly and extremely helpful software, and good luck with it. Yeah, any questions, reach out to me, and we'll see you at immersion, everyone. Have a good night.
Dr. Lee? Dr. Lee, are you taking any questions?